Announcements are a double-edged sword in church marketing and communication. They're necessary to make sure people know what's going on, but they can also be a real drag both in worship and on our social media feeds. So if you're looking to shake things up, making the jump to video announcements may be the answer for you and your church. On this episode of the MyCom Church Marketing Podcast, we're talking the pros, cons, and how-tos of video announcements. Well, thank you everybody for listening. My name is Dan Wunderlich. I'm a United Methodist pastor, and joining me as always is my co-host, our Methodist marketing guru, Darby Jones. How are you today, Darby?
I'm doing well. How are you, Dan?
I'm doing great. My question for you today, Darby, do you have a favorite viral video, or is there a YouTube video that you go back to repeatedly over and over again when you're just having kind of a slow day?
You have to YouTube man argues with spitting goat. It's this guy who's I like to imagine that he's having like this political debate with this spitting goat, and after every sentence that this guy utters, the goat's like pff, and spits in his face. And they go on for like a couple minutes back and forth.
That's so great. That's so great.
It makes me happy.
I'm a sucker for Ron Swanson clips from Parks and Rec, and so whenever I'm having a slow day or need to shake it up, I'll hop on YouTube. And there's one particular one where he's at a diner and he asks to be served all the bacon and eggs that they have, and he clarifies that I'm serious. I want all the bacon and eggs that you have. And so that's the one I turn to. That voice you hear laughing in the background is our special guest for today, Lawrence Glass. She is one of the resident video gurus at United Methodist Communications, and you probably remember her if you've been listening for a couple episodes now, because she was also our star guest on episode 10 about video production. Lawrence, welcome back to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me again. I feel honored that you actually asked me to come back this morning. And I was thinking, quit laughing, but oh well.
Lawrence, do you have a favorite video that you turn to when you need to pick me up in the middle of the afternoon?
Oh, yes, there are several. This one goes back a really long way, but it's the white parrot or the exotic bird who's dancing.
Oh, yeah,
the Backstreet Boys, I believe. And he just is so on the beat, and he's sort of off the beat, like he's syncopating, and then he takes a bow at the end. But he's enjoying it so much that I can't watch it without enjoying that too. So that always lifts me up. It's been out there for a while, but yeah.
Oh yeah. And some of the best ones are the ones that we can turn to over and over again. And of course, our audience, we always want to hear from you. We value your feedback. And so if you have a favorite video, something that would give Darby and myself a little chuckle throughout the day, you can email it to podcast@umcom.org. We'll make sure to forward it to Lawrence as well. And we love sharing the joy. But before we jump into our discussion about video announcements, Lawrence, you shared your resume on episode 10. You've done a lot of work with both television stations, with country music, the entertainment industry. You worked with the Dick Clark Company for a while, and CBS, PBS, all of these amazing companies. And so rather than rehashing the full details of your resume, I want to ask you this time, what do you love most about working with video as a medium for communication?
I actually love making a positive difference. I went into video and television for that very reason. We watched a lot of PBS when I was growing up. We watched Masterpiece Theater. And I remember seeing a series on Leonardo da Vinci, and I thought, that's what I want to do, because I was so excited. I couldn't wait to watch it. And I was a kid, and I wanted to go look at his artwork, read more about him. I mean, it wasn't just that it was passive to me, it encouraged me to go learn more. And that's what I wanted to do. I just thought the power to reach people with a positive message was so amazing to me that I thought this is what I have to do. That, and my mother said, I really hope that you go into a career where they pay you to talk.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Well, the interesting thing is, of course, video announcements are not going to be full-on documentaries, but there's an aspect of storytelling to them. And when they're done well, just like that documentary inspired Lawrence, when video announcements are done well, they can inspire our congregations to take action and to live out the gospel and to be active members of the church. And before we jump in, I do want to say that we are indebted throughout this podcast to some really great MyCom articles on both video in general and video announcements specifically. We'll mention a few of them throughout the podcast, but be sure to check out the show notes. They have links to some really helpful resources. Some of the things we mentioned, there may be some things that we don't mention. The show notes are always a valuable resource that go along with these podcasts. So let's go ahead and jump in and talk about some of the pros and cons of switching to video announcements, because there are some great reasons to do it, and then there may be some reasons that it isn't time for you or your church yet. But let's go through some of them. Some of the pros that I was brainstorming before we began is that video announcements can save time with within the service, because you can really edit your video announcements to a specific time, where if you are delivering announcements in person, you always run the risk of rambling. If you're someone that can follow that rabbit trail and just keep going and going and going, before you know it, perhaps your in-person announcements have now stretched out and taken up more time than you intended. It's also similarly, you can script the content. And so you can ensure that you're saying exactly what you want to say, the way that you want to say it. Lawrence, you've worked a lot in video, both scripted and unscripted, doing interviews and things like this. How do you see this as a pro for someone who's wanting to deliver very specific information to their congregation?
Well, I think when you said scripted, that pretty much is a key word for me. So much of what feels or looks like spontaneity on television a lot of times really has been scripted to some degree, and it keeps you sort of with a beginning, middle, and end. So as you say, you don't ramble. And I think it also really, really helps you with specifics like dates and times, things that you might forget in the moment. I mean, even people who have a lot of information, a lot of experience, just ad-libbing, like to have a cue card down there that they can see.
Yeah, absolutely. Two more points that are similar. Screens are engaging. They help break up the experience of the service. And so if what we're seeing are people speaking from the pulpit or speaking from a microphone, or perhaps the band or the choir is there, looking up to the screen and watching a video is a different experience. It's a unique thing that stands out. And so it can grab people's attention. Video also offers us the chance to insert photos or video clips or text. And of course, you can always combo screens with in-person announcements, but then you're really asking someone to look sort of in two places at once. They're going to be shifting their eyes back and forth between the speaker at the front and the screen that's up there, where if you can intercut the details, or you can put perhaps the website folks are supposed to go to or the phone number that they're supposed to call on the screen while they're watching the person delivering the announcements, it can really help focus the congregation. And then, of course, video announcements can be repurposed and posted on social platforms. You can also email them to church members. So folks that weren't there in the service can still see and receive the same information. And then perhaps a logistical one that causes us to pull our hair out is it solves the problem of that person coming up to you 10 minutes before the service begins and says, "Can you announce this for me?" If you're giving the announcements in person verbally, you can have a hard and fast rule, but there's really nothing that can stop you from making that announcement. Where if you set a hard and fast rule and say, "We make the videos Wednesday afternoon, so we need your announcements in by Wednesday morning," it helps just create a logistical deadline to ensure that everything is running smoothly. Lawrence, do you have any thoughts about those pros or any other pros that you've thought of?
Yes. One of the things I was thinking about was that it really gives you an opportunity to show other people from the church. So if you're talking about having children join a church choir, you're talking about doing a pageant, if you have images of that from last year, I think a child is going to relate more to that. A parent may relate more to it. And you see yourself there. I think it generates, excitement. Again, a person can absolutely be exciting and motivating, but to see a picture of a child is motivating, I think, to a child, especially. And then I think, having that on social media, again, that's going to be more interesting than just the text and probably more shareable. So yeah, I think images are so powerful. Video is so powerful if you have video clips.
And let me ask you this, Lawrence. I'm someone who's comfortable in front of a room full of people as well as in front of a camera. Have you run into folks either in your work or perhaps just in your church who might be comfortable delivering the announcements to a camera, and that might be a way to get them involved, but they're people who would never step up in front of a room full of people and deliver announcements live? Do you see folks like that?
I do. And one of the interesting things is that it's very difficult to forget there's a room full of people looking at you. It's a little easier to forget there's a video camera. And whenever I interview people, I usually say, "Hey, we're just going to have a conversation. Talk to me. Just forget the camera's there." And after one or two questions, they actually do. And I think some people find out that talking to a camera after they get over the initial shock is actually pretty easy, and they can relax more than in front of people.
Absolutely. And of course, if you end up filming your video announcements on a smartphone, it can be even less sort of intimidating, because we see smartphones all the time. We perhaps film ourselves for Instagram or Facebook or things like that. So it can certainly be a way to get more people involved in the service who may not have the confidence or the gusto to sort of do something in person. Well, of course, video announcements also potentially have some drawbacks. So there may be some reasons why you want to hold off on making the switch. And certainly the first one that comes to mine is that it requires some equipment, it requires some software, and it requires a level of familiarity with video editing. Now, Lawrence, in episode 10, you talked about how that perhaps the fear of getting started or what we think it will cost is greater in our minds than it is in person. But do you have any words of encouragement for people who are maybe feeling held back by the equipment or the technical side of producing videos?
Oh, I absolutely do. I mean, when you think about the first times we had a smartphone, or the first time I saw a smartphone, I was intimidated. The first time, I had to do email. I mean, seriously, it's something we take for granted now. And there's so many applications that come with your computer to just put, upload images, and it's so much easier than you think. So I just recommend maybe closing the door, don't tell anybody, do it by yourself, and then, you don't feel so funny, or having somebody else in your congregation, maybe a young person, work with you. And I think it would be a really good opportunity to have a young person step up and you do training or help with this. So yeah, I would absolutely say, think about how you felt when you were thinking about reply versus reply all. And after a while, when when you've done PowerPoint, or you realize, oh, you just hit this arrow, it uploads this. Oh, I get it. It really is easier than you think.
If you have a Mac, it comes with iMovie,
Yes.
and it is so easy to use. It's like you're in kindergarten and cutting and pasting things together
Yes.
again. And so, like Lauren said, it already comes with the computer, and there's GarageBand. If you need to do some audio overdubbing, you can go to GarageBand and record a little bit of audio, and the two work really well together. It's drag and drop. And the other thing is, even though it does require some editing and expertise, video announcements is a good stepping stone for you to get into video. They're short segments, it doesn't require a ton of time, but you'll learn a valuable skill. So it's just a good way to get into video. It's all the rage on social media. It gets the most engagement. So you really need to take that opportunity.
Really, for me, I mean, to have someone just sort of walk me through it once, I tend to need to have somebody walk me through it, and then I just sort of need to do it, tactically myself. I do that better than I do reading instructions off the web. So however you learn, just work with it a little bit. And again, just remember, a lot of the, if you feel a little bit afraid, that's probably good. I mean, the first time I ever had to speak live for PBS, I almost canceled because I thought, I can't do this, and by the end of it, I was like, hey, this is great, So, I mean, a lot of times if you just jump in and do it a little bit, maybe have a little bit of guidance. And again, there are so many people, you don't expect a pastor or one lay leader or one person to know everything. And there's so many people in your congregation who you may already have video people out there, someone
Absolutely.
who could work with you a little bit. So that's a great, way to engage people too.
And video announcements, as we'll talk about in a minute or two, really shouldn't be long videos. So it's not like you're creating a 30-minute, dramatic presentation. And so perhaps for a few weeks or a month or two, you actually film and edit video announcements, but you don't end up using them. You just kind of use it as practice. Some other issues that certainly can come up and cause video announcements to maybe hinder from the service: sound quality and sound clarity is critical. If you're going to play video announcements, if no one can hear or understand what the person is saying, if you don't have a great sound setup, maybe you're in a real echoey room, or the microphone's too far away, that is obviously going to take away from the whole purpose of having the video. Then obviously creating a video adds time outside of the service. And so as Lauren said, you might look at your own schedule and say, I'm a senior pastor, or I'm the youth pastor and they've given this to me because they think I'm good with technology, but I don't have time. You don't necessarily have to be the one to do it, but there is someone that's going to have to take the time to do it. And the other thing is that, and this is something that I'm perhaps overly sensitive to, is that video announcements can't adjust to the moment in the service. So at the church that I help out at, we do the video announcements right at the beginning of the service. So it's the first thing that people see. It's what kind of gathers their attention. So there isn't anything that it has to adjust to. But if you choose to play your announcements maybe 20 minutes into the service and you've just finished perhaps maybe a slow hymn, or you've had a testimony or a prayer time that's been emotional, and then suddenly it kicks in with some maybe like rock music or something, it might be a jarring transition. And video announcements might not fit within all worship settings. And you can't see it on our outline. I put fit in scare quotes because it depends on the setting. Like, are you in a cathedral? Are you in a modern space? Are you in a room where you're having to project on a wall, or it just needs to sort of fit? And that's the most important thing. All communication needs to be effective in delivering the message. And if the medium of video announcements isn't achieving the purpose of informing the congregation, then it's not worth putting the time into. And then the last one, this was in the pros as well, can be repurposed and posted on social media platforms. That can also be a con too, because if all we're posting on our social media feeds is announcements and calls to action and saying, come help us, come do our activity, come be involved in what we care about. If all we're posting on our social media is asks of our audience, they're going to start to tune us out. And so while sharing announcements on social media can be a positive thing, it can also be a drawback too. Darby, Lawrence, you guys got any other thoughts about how, or maybe ideas that might give people pause or things to consider as they transition?
I was just thinking when you mentioned the time outside of the service that it takes, just to give people a good idea, how much time do you think it would take for one Sunday's announcements? Is it an hour? Will people get faster as they go along? What do you think about that?
I would say probably an hour to 2 hours. And again, one of the things I was thinking is that if you're not comfortable speaking or you feel like someone else isn't, just doing a visual, just having text could also help. I mean, you could do something with text and pictures and images and a little bit of music and have it be done that way. It could also be done with a voiceover if you're not comfortable. And one of the things that I thought was that might be a faster thing to put together because you don't have to have someone sit down necessarily with you and be on camera and coach them through that, or you don't have to do it yourself. But I think one of the things about the longevity of that is even if you didn't want it in your service, if you have screens in a parish hall or another situation that can be running even on a loop, that would be a way to reinforce those announcements. And one of the other things is a little bit off topic of time to produce it, but the time to write down information or a date. Sometimes people say something in a church and I'm like, wait, what was that? And if it's on a screen or it loops on a screen later, you have the time to write it down. And the Dick Clark rule was that you have to repeat a phone number 2 to 3 times or no one's ever going to get it. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I would say about 15 minutes of time collecting emails from people sending you announcements. There's, about 15, 20 minutes of just on camera announcing it. You'll spend 15, 20 minutes editing the announcements down in case their announcement was too long or whatever. And, about 15 minutes of uploading and importing everything and the video rendering. So, yeah, about hour and a half, 2 hours max.
Yeah, and of course, you got to remember, I'm like really scripted and I get really detailed and controlled about it. So when I say 2 hours for me, it may be 45 minutes for someone else. But it doesn't have to be, you don't have to think of it as being the movie production. It really can be more simple. And I always go back to the Ken Burns documentaries. All the fonts information are usually just white over black. White text
Absolutely.
on black. It's just very simple. Now, you don't want to do that every single time. I get it. You want to have some images and all that, but you will be having to stop and get all that information ahead of time, even if you were going to just say this live in a service. You will have to gather all that information too. So that's part of your time already. So, putting it to video is not that much more time. And one of the things I think is really interesting is that here locally, Pat Sajak worked at a station that I worked before he went on to Hollywood fame, and he was first charged with doing a minute announcements for a movie that came on. And all he had to do was just come on and say, here's the movie we're going to do. But he became he had such fun with it that he became like a cult figure doing these announcements. And people would tune in literally to watch him do the announcement for the movie and not watch the movie. And then they would tune in to see just what he was doing, and then they would talk about it, and it was this little bit of a buzz, and it showed his personality. And again, you don't want to be flippant with a church announcement, but it just shows how something can, spark people and they can enjoy it. And as far as social media, those things would have been on social media in minutes. After he did them, I think he would wear a smoking jacket. He would just come up with something different every time. Now, I'm not asking you to come up with something different every time, but just the power of a personality and a 1 minute of information that everyone talked about in Nashville after it aired.
I love that idea, that minute on a topic. If you had a minute on mission, you'd get all the essential, the most powerful information
like the
compacted
haiku of
into
video.
that. Yeah. That's a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And you will get faster over time. Just the
Yes.
more that you work with your tools, especially if you have the same presenter every week or maybe a rotation of people who are doing it. At our church, we have a high school young lady who does our announcements, and I've seen the growth in her just over the couple months that she's done it. Their filming time has gotten way shorter as she's gotten more comfortable, and the guys that put it together spend less time editing every week. And so just the more that you do it, it'll get faster, you'll get better at it. Two MyCom articles that I do want to direct your attention to. One is called Capture Attention with Creative Church Announcements, and the other is How to Do Video Announcements, 5 Questions to Ask. And so if you still have questions, if you're still weighing things after this discussion of pros and cons, these are 2 resources that you may want to check out and share with your team. If you have a team there at your church that makes these kinds of decisions, they might be great resources. Well, let's jump into the practical side. We'll do a little bit of a discussion about equipment. For general video production tips, I highly encourage that you go back and listen to episode 10 with Lawrence and John Watson, our previous host. They had a wonderful discussion all about video announcements. Lawrence gives tons of really great practical tips. But when we're thinking specifically about video announcements, we have a couple different options for equipment depending on what you have, what you can afford, what you're interested in investing in for the future. Because one of the things that Darby pointed out is that if you get skilled with your equipment and with your software, you can then use these tools and these skills to produce other kinds of videos. And video is one of the most effective channels for communication, particularly online and social media. But let's start with cameras. Obviously, you can use your smartphone or your tablet. These are high quality cameras that most of us are carrying around in our pockets. It might be helpful to search for a more, I guess, an app that gives you more control over how things appear. Certain technical terms like focus and exposure and frame rate and things. Some of these video apps give you more control. And we do have a MyCom article that recommends an app called Filmic Pro for Apple devices, iOS devices. Lawrence, what is your recommendation for folks that are looking at using smartphones or tablets to record simple videos like this?
You know, really, I always do research online with the device that I have just to sort of find out the pros and cons from experts because I'm not as technical a person with equipment. And I think the benefit of a camera right now is you always have it with you. And mine is a few ages back and it still shoots high definition video and images. So I get these images that are 5,000 pixels, which is just incredible. That's broadcast quality. But whenever I'm looking at equipment, I usually say, okay, this is what I have, or this is my budget. And I go online and see what the experts say.
And if we make the jump up to a more dedicated camera or a more professional camera, as we venture into digital cameras or DSLR cameras, what are some of the advantages to going to a more professional or higher quality camera, Lawrence?
Well, you're absolutely going to get a better video. I mean, think about some of the things that we see on YouTube. The content is very engaging and fun, but you can really tell it's not very high def and the audio is not very good. And then think about a feature film. I mean, I know those are extremes, but investing in a camera is going to give you much higher quality, and it probably gives you more room when your lighting is not as good. It's going to enable you to capture much, much better audio with the audio equipment.
And a DSLR is one of a digital single lens camera, and it looks like sort of the professional camera. And there are some that are very affordable, and then there are some that are very, very expensive. I would say from my own personal experience, and perhaps a mistake that I made, when I purchased my DSLR, I didn't look specifically at its abilities or limitations with video. And one of the drawbacks for the camera that I particularly bought is I can only record 10 minutes of video at a time, where some DSLRs don't have a limit. So if you're looking for a camera, a DSLR can act as both a photography camera and a videography camera. Just make sure that you're inspecting all the little details like that and make sure it can do what you want it to do. Because at the time, I just wanted to take pictures. And now that I'm more involved in social media ministry, I'm looking at, oh, hey, I could shoot videos. But now I've got this sort of artificial cap on how long I can film at a time. So look into details like that. Now let's jump into audio. Lawrence, this is one of the most perhaps overlooked aspects of videos, but it's one of the most important aspects of videos, especially if the idea is to communicate information. What are some of the audio options that you have worked with, and what might you recommend for churches?
I think when you say the word mic, it can be a little intimidating. And I'm not an audio person either. But I will say that there are mics now that will plug directly into your phone or a camera, just like your headphones. So if you can think of it that way, you're just plugging that in. It's just about that easy. And then learning to look at levels is a lot easier than you think. I can't tell you how much video I've discarded because of bad audio. And I can't tell you of how many incredible sound bites, and a truck goes by. Yeah. Somebody was just trying to do it with a mic on the camera, an in-camera mic, and you just can't capture the same because it wants to pull in all of the background noise sort of equally. So investing in a mic, and they're not that expensive to get a mic that would wire into your camera or into your phone, that could either be like a handheld mic that you think of as a singer singing into, or what we call a lavalier, which is something that you think of, interviews on the news where it's just clipped on. They really are very reasonable now. They're really, really worth an investment.
Absolutely. And yeah, more and more mics are being introduced that can plug directly into your phone or your tablet. Again, going back to my adventures with my camera, my DSLR camera does not have an audio input jack. So even if I were to find a great mic, I can't plug it into my camera. It does have built-in audio. It has a mic built into the camera, but as Lauren said, it's terrible. It picks up the echoes. It picks up my, dog scratching at the door in the other room. And so actually what I end up having to do is plug a microphone into a separate audio recorder, which is an option. You can get maybe a little Tascam device or some other sort of digital recorder and plug a microphone into that. Then you'll just have to line up the audio and video files properly in your video editor. And of course, that's the reason they have clapboards in movies, and you can do it yourself, do a little clap. Lawrence, tell us about the claps.
Yes, absolutely. I actually enjoy doing that. So I was working on I was working in a studio where we were doing take after take after take and having to mark which take it was. And that was one of my favorite things to do. So I was like, wait for me. I want to come do the clap. So I know that, it actually means that when you see my hands close, you can match the video to what the audio sound is. And, one of the advantages of having a piece of audio equipment that's separate from your camera is that you can move it further away. So if you were trying to capture something that's farther, say you don't want to have your camera or your person close to a performance, you can't get such great audio from the back of a church. If you have, separate recording equipment that you've been able to invest in, you can, So having a wire from your phone to a person who's being interviewed is much, much better than trying to capture it on the small mic of the phone itself or the tablet or the camera. But again, if you can invest in, audio equipment, that gives you even more freedom.
Absolutely. The next thing that is going to affect the quality of your video is lighting. You can obviously use natural light if you're by some big windows or perhaps in an area where you can get lots of natural light. You can use lamps. We would probably encourage you to avoid using overhead fluorescence, anything that causes high contrast, harsh or unflattering shadows. Certainly backlighting is going to be difficult because it's going to make you look like a shadow if the background is really bright. And there are some sort of DIY tricks that you can use in place of some of the more professional lighting things. You can use a white poster board to sort of bounce light and help light someone from below. You can use wax paper to diffuse lights. Lawrence, do you have any guerrilla lighting techniques for us?
Yes, my guerrilla lighting technique is when I first tried to take lighting in college, I was a little intimidated. And one of the things that I learned in the field is, where is your light coming from? That's just a very simple thing. Wherever you are, where is your light coming from? Because if your light is coming from a window or a light and you put that person in front of it so that the back of their head now has a halo, but you can't see their face, you just learn that really quickly. And as you said, I really, really, really recommend not doing something under a direct light so the light is coming down, because it creates so many shadows and it can almost be distracting. You want something that just sort of has an overall wash feel. And I remember having somebody take some photos of me one time and they put me slightly in the shadow, which I'm not saying go in the shadow. I'm not saying that, but they were trying to get me out of direct sun. So he put me slightly under a shadow where everything evened out. So just look for where your light source is and think about using it to your advantage.
Well, we touched a bit earlier on editing. Darby mentioned iMovie, which is a program that comes preloaded on Macs. There are lots of video editing options out there, both free and paid. And to be honest, the best video editing option for you is the one that you know how to use. And so if you have a program that you've been using that you know, or there's a program that you can learn quickly, that is going to be far better than going out and trying to find the most professional or most detailed program you can. Use the program that gets the video to look good and gets it done in a reasonable amount of time. And there are tons and tons of tutorials on YouTube for how to use all kinds of software, including video editing software. And then another aspect that you might want to include in your video is some background music. It can add some energy. That's one of the benefits that you have to creating a video, is that you can layer things on top of each other. But the most important thing is we need to use music that we legally have the right to use, whether we own the license to it or whether it's royalty-free music. Even Christian music, a lot of times we in the church might think this artist would really support us using their songs because it's helping to advance the gospel. But at the same time, they have to feed their families. They're doing this as a job, and we really need to respect all of the rules and regulations around it. There are some free sources for music out there. YouTube has an audio library. There's a website called the Free Music Archive. SoundCloud and some other websites have some free music available. Just be sure to read the licenses that come with them. Are they royalty free? Are they in the public domain? Are they under some level of Creative Commons? You might find a piece of music that's licensed under Creative Commons that allows you to use it, but you just need to maybe put the artist name at the end of the video. So you add maybe a title card at the end that says, song title by a certain artist. And then there's all sorts of paid music sources. If you create a lot of videos, there's a website that I use called Soundstripe that you can subscribe to and download as many pieces or license as many pieces of music as you want per month. So if you're making a lot of videos, that might be an option. Lawrence, do you have any tips or cautions when using music?
Well, since I have a family of musicians, I completely agree with you. And I think that, in the digital age and everything's online, we're sort of used to downloading it and thinking, oh, we can use it. But I do think it's very, very important to make sure, whether it's an image or music, that we do know that it's public domain, that we do have the right to use it. And there are free sources, just like there are free sources for great images. Wikimedia Commons, there are sources where you can just buy a CD. I have bought CDs of sound effects that I needed, that when I bought it, it gave me the right to use those sound effects as I wanted. So if you just do a little searching, I'm sure that you can find that. You don't have to do the type of purchase that a television station would do. You might just be able to find a few CDs that have some nice music on it. Another option is if you have musicians in your congregation who write their own original music and they would like to lend that to a special video once a year at Christmas, something that they've done originally, and they don't mind giving you permission, and then you can, give them permission. That's a kind of a neat option. That's a little more work, but I really do stress that it's very important. It's just the right thing to do legally and ethically.
Yeah, and it can also get your video taken down from YouTube or other sources if you're using music that you're not allowed to use. Well, let's close out the podcast by going through some quick but very practical tips. And I know, Lawrence, this is the section that's going to get you really excited because these are the kinds of details that you think live and breathe with as you do your work as a videographer. One of the first ones is to keep your video announcements short. There's a reason you're doing them in video form. Brady Shearer from Pro Video Announcements recommends that you cover 4 to 6 announcements in no more than 2 to 3 minutes. And if you think about yourself ad-libbing at the front of your church, I find it highly unlikely that you'll be able to cover 6 announcements in 2 to 3 minutes, but you'll find if you script them out for video and edit it really well, that's actually a reasonable amount of time. What do you think about people's attention spans in church, Lawrence or Darby? What's your experience with people's attention spans?
I think that we are sort of set up for video now to have a shorter attention span than when we were in a church. So I completely agree. Having someone in front of you speaking is a little bit different. And we're used to being able to get information in a video in a minute or in 90 seconds. That's maybe not the best thing in the world. But again, if you get the message across, think of haiku poetry. If you get the essence of it across, or a commercial that's 30 seconds that really touches you or benefits a nonprofit, it really can be done and it's effective. So think of it as a challenge.
Well, I have two sort of rules of thumb that I use when I am working with announcements in the church. The first is that knowing the details of an announcement doesn't matter if people don't care. It doesn't matter if they know where or when to show up if they don't care, because if they don't care, they're not going to show up, even if they know where it's happening. And so that the second point is to focus on making people care, showing and telling them where to find the details alongside. So perhaps what you do is you talk about a ministry or an event that you have coming up in your church, but then on the screen, you have maybe the date and time or the website to go visit, but use your spoken time to tell the story of the event or to cast the vision for the event and to make people care, because it's only once they care that they're then going to seek out the details. A great MyCom article we have is Make Your Ministry Announcements Better, Tips That Boost Action. And this talks all about how to craft your announcements in a way to actually get your congregation to care and get involved. The next set of tips, have the host introduce themselves and perhaps include their name and title on the screen at the beginning. Obviously, you want to have your host prepare and know the script, or you can shoot bits at a time. You can maybe even rig up some sort of teleprompter or cue cards, and you want to make sure that you shoot it until you get it right so that you can edit it down into a tight package. Lawrence, what are some of the tips that you have? You've worked with hosts, you have interviewed folks. What are some of the tips that you have for making people appear natural on camera or help them feel more natural, maybe work out some of their awkward facial expressions or hand movements or positioning? What are some of the tips you have for appearing on camera?
You know, one of the things that I say is that just be natural in that you would not be perfect if I were talking to you. It's totally okay to look at cue cards. So don't feel like you have to memorize. I think people come in and think, I have to be perfect. I can't ever stop and start. What if I say the wrong thing? The beautiful thing about video, as you said, is you can stop and do it again and you can edit. And when I tell people that, they really tend to calm down. I would not expect anyone to know all the details of an event without looking at a card. So don't feel like you have to memorize and have everything in your head. It is completely normal. If you think about newscasters, even when they're not looking at a teleprompter, let's say they're in the field, they look at a card, they look at a script and look down and look up. As long as they're natural about it and comfortable, you will be too. That's the one thing. One of the things I did, and I've done it myself, is to practice in a mirror. Because I tend to be really animated. I use my hands a lot. And so I do it in a mirror a little bit and then just do it on camera. Do it on camera. Do some video and do some practice. I always rehearse. Don't be afraid to try it a couple of times. You don't have to do it perfectly the very first time.
Now, let me ask you, I never know what to do with my hands. Let's say that we're shooting video announcements and we're standing, and one of the ways is obviously to frame the video from the shoulders up and make it a tight thing. But if I'm appearing on camera and you can see my hands, what do you recommend for folks to do with their hands?
So if you tend to be a person who uses your hands a lot like I do, I would not try to force someone to not do that. I would widen the shot out and just see how it does with them using their hands. They may have a card that they have information written on. Just see how that goes. Let them feel natural. So I don't want you to be artificial and never make a facial expression and never use your hands. It helps me when I see myself to kind of bring it down a little bit. I think a very tight shot is very, very good if you're really comfortable. But if someone's a bit of a novice or they're not as comfortable, or you are seeing their hands come up, feel free and flexible to pull that shot out and have it be wider.
And if you're going to take your video announcements and then post them online, especially if you're going to share them on social media, here are a couple technical things that you may want to do. You're going to want to look at adding subtitles. You can do this through what's called an SRT file. You can add subtitles through YouTube. Sometimes when you upload your video to Facebook, if the audio is clear enough, they will have the option to automatically add subtitles. So often now, the videos we watch, especially on social media, people are watching with the sound off. And so if you really want to make sure the information gets across, you're going to want to Google or maybe look for a tutorial on YouTube about how to add subtitles to your video. And then just another practical thing, consider making a web cut of your video announcements. If you're announcing something that's going to happen immediately after the service, but the video announcement isn't going to be posted until Monday, that announcement isn't relevant anymore. So maybe you create a second version of the announcements that don't include it. And another thing is, if you look at your social media channels as an outreach, perhaps you cut out an announcement about, say, a finance committee meeting or something like that, an announcement that's not that relevant or isn't going to sort of capture the imagination or inspire a visit from folks that are watching your announcements online. So consider making a separate cut if you have the time, obviously. And then one more real sort of technical recommendation is that anytime you can sort of make a change in what people are watching, it helps keep them engaged. You know, if you watch television shows nowadays, there's cuts all the time. One of the simple ways you can do this is if you have, and even some smartphones can do this, if you can film in 4K, and then if you have a sort of more advanced video editing program, you may be able to change the framing. And so you use one camera, but it actually looks like you're using two different cameras. And I know it's kind of hard to explain over audio, but even dropping in title cards and announcements, changing up the view is a way to perhaps keep people engaged. And then, as Darby mentioned earlier, we can take advantage of people's focused attention in these videos to highlight certain ministries. And there's a really great MyCom article called How to Create a Ministry Spotlight During Worship. And that's about how to concisely feature a ministry, but it may be something that you can include in your video announcements. Darby or Lawrence, do you guys have any closing thoughts on the topic of making the jump to video announcements?
You know, it's so funny. Since I grew up in television and video, I never learned PowerPoint. So I'm just going to confess, I'm actually like a little intimidated to learn PowerPoint. I've done video editing that aired locally on television, but I'm a little intimidated to learn PowerPoint. And I realize that it's just because I haven't done it. So I would just encourage anyone to try it. It's not as difficult as you think, and you may develop a passion for doing this where you can even lend more videos to your church and capture performances and capture ministries. And don't ever underestimate the power of an image to engage people. I'm a writer. I would love to say that only words will do it, and they certainly do. But if you're talking about children who are raising money to provide money for a service dog, for a soldier, that is very, very compelling. If you have images of the dogs, if you have images of the children, just your heart just goes out even more. It's just such an advantage. So I would just say, just try it. Take a baby step and try it and see how you grow. Don't think that you have to put this pressure on yourself to be perfect. And all of a sudden you'll realize a year later, oh my gosh, I'm really good at this.
There's a whole psychology to it. Someone's watching that dog and you got the Ken Burns effect and it's sliding across the screen. People respond to moving images and it just keeps their interest. It stops them from checking their phone and tuning out. And it takes way more time to say less. And this whole process of making videos is a craft and an art, and you're building these skills in the presenters. You're turning them into storytellers, and they get better at honing their craft and saying the most interesting, most essential thing about whatever they're passionate about. And so it may sound scary, but you really are doing this great thing and building skills in people, and it's going to be empowering, and it's totally worth your time.
And one thing I would add is that when we say the word video, I sort of immediately envision cameras and lights and a crew taking some very, very good images that someone has taken of an event and being able to do what we call manipulation or a move on them, which just means you have a still JPEG image and you're going to have the application of your movie video application kind of push into it, maybe slide across. It gives a movement to it, and we sort of call it fake video when we didn't have the money to go out and cover it with a video, but we took a lot of pictures. You would be surprised that just being able to zoom in a little bit, zoom out a little bit on some still photos, how effective that can be. So, use your imagination on that with just images and text too.
Well, Lawrence, thank you so much for joining us today and helping us navigate this terrain.
Oh, it's absolutely a pleasure. Thank you so much for asking me.
Well, now, listeners, we want to hear from you. Have you or your church tried video announcements? If so, how did they go? And if not, what's holding you back? Also, we're always on the lookout for gear suggestions. You notice that we didn't list a whole lot of brands and models and things. So if you have found a camera or a microphone or an app or even a piece of software that works great and fits within your church's budget, we want to hear your recommendations. Email us at podcast@umcom.org, and we just might share your input on a future episode of the podcast. And of course, you can use that email, podcast@umcom.org, podcast@umcom.org, to send us any and all feedback or topic suggestions for the show. We always love hearing from you. Finally, if you have found this podcast to be helpful and you'd like to make sure other church communicators like yourself find this resource, the two biggest things you can do are share this episode with your friends and colleagues and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, or whatever service you're listening to us on right now. Thanks again so much for listening to the MyCom Church Marketing Podcast.